Joel Goldsmith discovered something that shattered everything the church taught him about Jesus. It wasn't heresy. It wasn't blasphemy. It was the original teaching that got buried under 2,000 years of dogma and fear. What he found changed not just his spiritual practice, but the lives of thousands who dared to listen. This isn't about religion. This is about direct spiritual experience. The religious establishment didn't want you to know this. They built entire institutions on keeping you dependent, keeping you small, keeping you believing you need an intermediary between you and the divine. Joel discovered that Jesus never intended to be worshipped. He intended to show you what you're capable of becoming. The Christ isn't a person to pray to. It's a state of consciousness you can experience. Here's what they don't teach in Sunday school. Jesus said the kingdom of heaven is within you. Not within him, within you. He said you would do greater works than he did. Not pray harder to him. Do greater works yourself. Joel realized that every miracle Jesus performed was a demonstration of a spiritual law that you can access right now. This isn't metaphor, this is instruction. The truth Joel taught. Jesus came to reveal your divine nature, not to be the only one who has it. That changes everything about how you approach prayer, healing, and your entire spiritual life. You've been taught to beg. Joel discovered you're meant to realize what you already are. Traditional Christianity teaches separation. You're the sinner. Jesus is the Savior. God is unreachable except through approved channels. Joel discovered this creates a consciousness of lack that blocks every spiritual demonstration. You can't heal from a consciousness that believes you're separate from healing power. You can't manifest abundance while believing you're unworthy of divine grace. What Jesus actually taught was mystical union. Not someday in heaven. Right now, in this moment. The Christ consciousness isn't something Jesus possessed exclusively 2,000 years ago. It's the eternal truth of being that exists in you this very second. Joel called it recognizing your sonship, not earning it through good behavior or correct belief, recognizing what's already true. This is why your prayers haven't worked the way you hoped. You've been praying from a consciousness of need, asking an external God to change external circumstances. Joel discovered that true prayer is the recognition of what already is in spiritual reality. You don't beg for healing. You realize there's nothing in spirit that needs healing. The body reflects consciousness. When you grasp this, every gospel teaching transforms. Turn the other cheek isn't passive submission. It's refusing to accept the appearance of evil as power. Love your enemies isn't moral superiority. It's recognizing there are no enemies in spirit, only divine beings wearing masks of human personality. Here's the practice Joel taught that churches avoid. Stop praying to Jesus and start praying from the Christ consciousness. The difference is everything. Praying to Jesus keeps you in the beggar position, hoping someone with more power will intervene. Praying from Christ consciousness means recognizing you already have access to the same infinite source that Jesus accessed. Jesus never said, "Worship me." He said, "Follow me. Learn what I learned. Do what I'm doing." The moment you make Jesus into God and yourself into a worm, you've missed the entire point of his teaching. Joel discovered that every time Jesus said "I," he meant the Christ within him. And that same "I" exists in you, not your human personality. The eternal divine identity beneath it. This is practical, not theoretical. When you face illness, instead of begging Jesus to heal you, you practice Christ consciousness. You don't deny the body's appearance. You simply refuse to give it ultimate reality. You recognize that in spirit, there is no disease, no lack, no limitation. As you rest in that truth, the body begins to reflect spiritual perfection. Joel proved this worked through decades of spiritual healing. Not positive thinking, not visualization, pure recognition of what's already true in the invisible realm of spirit. The external world has no choice but to conform to consciousness, that spiritual law. The final piece Joel revealed: the cross wasn't God's punishment for humanity's sin. It was Jesus demonstrating that even death has no power over Christ consciousness. He didn't die to save you from hell. He conquered death to show you that your true identity can never be destroyed. You are not your body. You are not your circumstances. You are eternal spirit appearing as temporary human form. This understanding transforms suffering. You're not being punished. You're not being tested. You're simply experiencing the outpicturing of whatever consciousness you're holding. Change the consciousness, and the experience must change, not through willpower, through recognition of spiritual truth. Joel called it the practice of the presence of God, not a distant God you petition, the presence that is your very being. When you truly grasp that Christ consciousness is your consciousness, prayer becomes meditation. You're not talking to God. You're listening. You're not asking for things. You're receiving the awareness of what Spirit has already provided. Everything you've been seeking externally exists in the invisible realm of consciousness. Your work is to recognize it, accept it, and watch it appear. This is the truth they silenced because it puts spiritual power back in your hands. No priests required, no rituals necessary, just you, practicing the presence, recognizing your divine sonship, and watching your entire reality transform from the inside out. Joel spent 50 years proving it works. Now it's your turn. Margaret sat in Joel's meditation class in 1952, terminally ill with what doctors called incurable. She'd prayed every prayer the church taught her. She'd begged Jesus to intervene. She'd confessed every sin she could remember. Nothing changed. Her body continued deteriorating. Joel looked at her with deep compassion and said something that shocked her. Stop praying for healing and start recognizing wholeness. For 3 weeks, Margaret practiced what Joel taught. Every morning, instead of listing her symptoms to God, she sat in silence, recognizing that in spirit, there is no disease. She didn't deny her pain. She simply refused to give it ultimate power. She stopped seeing herself as a sick woman begging for mercy and started recognizing herself as spiritual consciousness, temporarily experiencing a physical challenge. The shift happened gradually, not instantly. First, the fear dissolved. Then the pain lessened. Within 2 months, her doctors found no trace of the disease they'd declared incurable. Margaret didn't get healed. She recognized she'd never been separate from wholeness. The body simply reflected the change in consciousness. This wasn't miracle. This was spiritual law in operation. Joel documented dozens of cases like Margaret's over 5 decades of ministry. People with tumors, heart disease, paralysis, mental illness. Not every case showed immediate physical healing, but every person who truly grasped Christ consciousness experienced inner transformation that changed everything. Some bodies healed, some didn't. But every consciousness that awakened found peace beyond circumstances. Robert was a successful businessman who'd built his empire through aggressive competition and ruthless strategy. He attended one of Joel's lectures in Hawaii, expecting religious platitudes. Instead, Joel spoke about consciousness creating experience. Robert scoffed. 3 months later, his business collapsed overnight. Partners betrayed him. Investments failed. He lost everything. Desperate and broken, Robert returned to Joel's teachings. This time he actually listened. Joel taught him that his consciousness of struggle and competition had attracted exactly what he feared most: loss and betrayal. The external world was simply reflecting his internal state. Robert began practicing what Joel called living from grace instead of law. Every morning for 6 months, Robert sat in meditation, recognizing divine abundance as the only reality. He stopped trying to manipulate circumstances and started resting in spiritual supply. He didn't visualize money. He recognized the infinite nature of Source. He didn't scheme to rebuild his business. He let consciousness guide him to right action. The rebuilding took 2 years, not 2 weeks. But what emerged was completely different from what collapsed. Robert created a business based on cooperation instead of competition, on service instead of exploitation. He prospered beyond his previous success, but this time from a consciousness of abundance rather than fear. Joel's teaching hadn't just restored his finances, it had transformed his entire relationship with life. Elizabeth spent 40 years in traditional Christianity, faithful and devout. She attended church every Sunday, served on committees, taught Sunday school. Yet she felt spiritually empty. Her prayers seemed to bounce off the ceiling. Jesus felt distant, unreachable. She loved God but couldn't feel God's presence. Joel's teaching found her when she was ready to give up on spirituality altogether. What shocked Elizabeth most was Joel's statement that she'd been taught to worship Jesus instead of learning from Jesus. She'd made him so divine that she'd missed his actual message. You have the same access to God that I have. For months, Elizabeth struggled with this idea. Wasn't it blasphemy to claim divine sonship? Joel gently showed her dozens of gospel passages she'd read for decades but never truly seen. The transformation happened during a silent meditation retreat. Elizabeth stopped praying words and simply sat in the presence. For the first time in her life, she felt what Joel called the click, a moment of recognition beyond thought where she knew, not believed but knew, that Christ consciousness was her consciousness. Tears streamed down her face. This was what she'd been seeking for 40 years. Elizabeth didn't leave her church, but her practice changed completely. She no longer prayed to an external God. She practiced recognizing the presence within. Her relationships deepened. Her health improved. Her joy became unshakable because it no longer depended on circumstances. Joel had given her what traditional religion couldn't: direct spiritual experience. Thomas was a minister who secretly struggled with doubt. He preached salvation through Jesus, but privately wondered if any of it was real. He'd seen too many faithful people suffer, too many prayers go unanswered. When he discovered Joel's recordings, everything he thought he knew about Jesus shifted. Joel wasn't denying Jesus. He was revealing what Jesus actually taught before doctrine obscured it. The crisis came when Thomas realized he'd been teaching people to depend on external salvation instead of awakening to their divine nature. He'd kept them small and dependent when Jesus came to set them free. For 6 months, Thomas wrestled with whether to continue ministry. Joel's teaching gave him a new framework. He could serve without lying. He could honor Jesus while teaching Christ consciousness. Thomas gradually transformed his ministry. Instead of preaching sin and salvation, he taught meditation and presence. Instead of encouraging petition prayers, he guided people into recognition of what already exists in spirit. Some congregants left, uncomfortable with the shift, but others awakened to direct spiritual experience for the first time in their lives. 2 years into this new approach, Thomas watched his congregation transform. Healings occurred, relationships restored. People discovered peace they'd never found through traditional doctrine. Joel's teaching hadn't destroyed Thomas's ministry. It had fulfilled it by revealing what Jesus actually intended. Not worshipers, but awakened beings living from Christ consciousness. If these transformation stories inspire you to explore this hidden truth, like this video to help others discover Joel Goldsmith's revolutionary teaching. Subscribe for more mystical Christianity wisdom, and comment. Which story resonated most deeply with your spiritual journey? Beyond meditation, Joel taught a practice he called recognizing the nothingness of error. When you face any problem, your natural response is to fight it, fix it, or pray for its removal. Joel discovered this approach gives the problem power. Instead, you practice recognizing that in spiritual reality, the problem doesn't exist, not as denial of appearance, but as recognition of what's true in consciousness. Here's how it works practically. You face a financial crisis. Traditional religion says pray to God for money. Positive thinking says visualize abundance. Joel taught something radically different. Recognize that in spirit, there is no lack. Period. You don't try to change the external circumstance. You rest in the awareness that divine supply is infinite and always available. As consciousness shifts, circumstances must reflect that shift. This practice requires spiritual maturity. You're not pretending the problem isn't there. You're refusing to give it ultimate reality. You acknowledge the appearance while recognizing that appearances are temporary and consciousness is cause. The bank account shows 0, but spiritual reality knows nothing of limitation. You hold both truths simultaneously without trying to manipulate the outer to match the inner. Joel proved this principle through decades of demonstration. Not every problem dissolved immediately, but every consciousness that genuinely rested in spiritual truth eventually saw external confirmation. The timing isn't yours to control. Your work is recognition, not manifestation. Manifestation happens automatically when consciousness aligns with spiritual reality. Joel taught another complementary practice, living in the now. Not as New Age philosophy, but as spiritual law. The only place Christ consciousness exists is this present moment. Your mind wants to live in past regrets or future anxieties. Joel discovered that every spiritual problem exists only when you leave the now. In this moment, stripped of mental commentary, where is the problem? Practice this right now. Put aside past and future completely. What's happening in this exact second? You're alive. You're conscious. You're reading these words. Is there suffering in this pure moment, or only in the thoughts about other moments? Joel taught that the practice of presence isn't escaping life, it's discovering where life actually exists. Here, now, always. This transforms prayer from petition to presence. You don't ask God to fix your future. You recognize God as the only power operating in this present moment. Every gospel teaching Jesus gave was about now. The kingdom of heaven is at hand means it's available right now, not after death. Consider the lilies means stop projecting into tomorrow and see divine provision operating today. As you practice living in the now, you'll notice something remarkable. Problems lose their grip because they exist only in time. Pain might be present, but suffering about pain requires thought about past or future. Joel wasn't teaching you to ignore life. He was showing you where real life happens, in this eternal moment of Christ consciousness that never leaves the present. The third complementary practice Joel taught was recognizing oneness, not as mystical poetry, but as practical reality. Every problem you face stems from the belief in separation. You're separate from God, from supply, from health, from other people. Joel discovered that this belief in separation is the only actual sin, which means missing the mark of truth. Spiritual reality knows only oneness. When someone wrongs you, traditional religion says, forgive them. Joel taught something deeper. Recognize there's no separate person to forgive. There's only one divine consciousness appearing as many forms. The person who wronged you is Christ consciousness temporarily forgetting itself, just as you sometimes forget your divine nature. This doesn't excuse harmful behavior. It removes the emotional charge that keeps you trapped. Practice this with every relationship challenge. Instead of seeing an enemy, recognize a divine being experiencing human confusion. Instead of feeling victimized, recognize that nothing in spirit can actually be harmed. Your eternal identity is untouchable. The human personality might feel hurt, but Christ consciousness remains forever whole and complete. This oneness extends to everything you desire. You're not separate from the abundance, health, or peace you seek. They're not out there waiting to be acquired. They exist in consciousness right now. Your work isn't pursuing them. Your work is recognizing you've never been separate from them. As that recognition deepens, external experience must confirm what consciousness knows. Joel's final complementary practice was what he called living by grace. Grace isn't God's mercy toward sinners. Grace is the automatic flow of divine good that operates when you stop trying to earn, manipulate, or control. Every attempt to make something happen comes from the belief that you're separate from Source. Living by grace means recognizing that Source is already supplying everything before you ask. This practice feels terrifying to the human mind. You stop planning, stop strategizing, stop trying to force outcomes. You simply rest in spiritual truth and let consciousness guide you to right action. This isn't passivity. It's the most active spiritual practice possible because it requires constant vigilance against the mind's desire to take control and make things happen through human effort. Joel proved this principle repeatedly. He never advertised his lectures or promoted his books. He simply taught what he'd discovered, and thousands found their way to him. Divine grace supplied everything needed without manipulation or hustle. The human mind rebels against this approach, insisting you must do something. Joel discovered that spiritual consciousness is always doing everything. Your work is getting out of the way. As you practice these complementary tools alongside recognizing Christ consciousness, your entire spiritual life transforms. You're no longer a beggar approaching an external God. Your consciousness recognizing itself as the presence and power of God, right here, right now. Everything Jesus taught becomes practical instruction instead of impossible ideals. Here's the challenge nobody mentions. When you first practice Christ consciousness, your circumstances might get worse before they improve. Joel warned his students about this. You're shifting from one state of consciousness to another, and the transition can be turbulent. Old patterns resist dying. The ego fights recognition of its unreality. Problems you've been avoiding surface for healing. Sarah practiced Joel's teaching faithfully for 3 months and watched her life fall apart. Her marriage hit crisis. Her business struggled. Her health declined. She called Joel in desperation, convinced she was doing something wrong. Joel's response shocked her. Everything false in your life is being revealed so truth can replace it. Don't abandon the practice now. Go deeper into Christ consciousness. This is where most people quit. They return to traditional prayer, begging God to fix the chaos. Joel taught that this chaos is actually progress. Consciousness is cleaning house. Everything not built on spiritual truth must crumble, so what's real can emerge. The false marriage must end so the true relationship can begin. The business based on struggle must fail so the business based on grace can form. Sarah stayed with the practice. 6 months later, she looked back and saw that everything that fell apart needed to fall apart. The marriage that ended had been dead for years. The business that failed had drained her soul. The health crisis forced her to address patterns she'd been ignoring. Joel's teaching hadn't caused the chaos. It had revealed what was already there. Another obstacle Joel's students faced was the silence of God. You practice presence. You meditate. You recognize Christ consciousness. And nothing seems to happen. No voice, no vision, no dramatic spiritual experience. Just silence. The mind interprets this as failure or God's absence. Joel taught that the silence is actually the goal, not the problem. God doesn't speak in words because God isn't a person. God is consciousness itself. The silence you fear is actually the presence you seek. When thoughts quiet, what remains is pure awareness. That awareness is Christ consciousness. You keep waiting for something dramatic to happen, missing the fact that the transformation is occurring in the silence itself. Joel compared it to a seed growing underground. Nothing appears to be happening above the surface, but massive change is occurring in the invisible realm. Your consciousness is shifting, even when you can't perceive it. The external results come later, after the internal foundation has been established. Trust the silence. Rest in the silence. The silence is where true spiritual work happens. This requires patience that modern spirituality doesn't teach. You want instant results, immediate confirmation that you're doing it right. Joel discovered that real spiritual transformation takes time, not because God is slow, but because consciousness shifts gradually as false beliefs dissolve and truth becomes established. 3 months of practice is just the beginning. Joel practiced for 50 years and said he was still learning. The third major obstacle is doubt. You practice Christ consciousness and doubt creeps in. Maybe this is all delusion. Maybe Joel was wrong. Maybe you should return to traditional religion where at least you know what you're supposed to believe. Joel faced this doubt himself in his early years. He understood the temptation to abandon spiritual practice when results don't match expectations. Here's how Joel handled doubt. He didn't fight it or deny it. He recognized that doubt arises from the human mind, not from Christ consciousness. Consciousness itself never doubts because it simply is. The doubt is another thought passing through awareness. You can observe the doubt without being controlled by it. Let the doubt be present while you continue practicing presence. Over time, Joel noticed something remarkable. The more he practiced despite doubt, the less power doubt had. Not because he conquered it through willpower, but because consciousness was establishing itself as primary reality. Doubt still appeared occasionally, but it no longer determined his actions. He continued practicing presence whether doubt was present or absent. This is spiritual maturity. You don't wait until you feel certain to practice. You practice despite uncertainty, despite doubt, despite lack of external confirmation. Joel taught that consciousness develops through use, like a muscle. The more you practice recognizing Christ consciousness regardless of how you feel, the more established that consciousness becomes. Faith isn't believing hard enough. Faith is continuing to practice when belief wavers. The final obstacle Joel addressed was the problem of persistent negative patterns. You recognize Christ consciousness. You practice presence, yet the same problems keep appearing. The same relationship patterns, the same financial struggles, the same health issues. Your mind screams that the practice isn't working. Joel taught that these persistent patterns reveal deeper consciousness that needs addressing. Every external pattern reflects internal consciousness. If the pattern persists, there's a belief operating below your awareness that keeps creating it. Joel's approach was to sit in meditation and ask consciousness to reveal the hidden belief. Not asking God for answers, but letting your own awareness show you what you can't see. The answer always comes when you're truly ready to see it. Michael struggled with poverty consciousness for years despite practicing Joel's teaching. One day in meditation, the hidden belief surfaced. He believed spiritual people should be poor to prove they're not materialistic. This belief operated unconsciously, sabotaging every financial demonstration. Once he saw it, he could recognize it as false. Spiritual consciousness knows nothing of poverty. Within months, his finances transformed. This is deep work that requires brutal honesty. You can't heal what you won't acknowledge. Joel taught that every persistent problem is an invitation to discover false beliefs you don't know you're holding. The problem isn't punishment, it's teacher. As you bring these hidden beliefs into consciousness and recognize their unreality, the patterns lose power, not through effort, but through recognition of truth. If these obstacle-transforming insights are breaking through your spiritual barriers, like to support this revolutionary teaching, subscribe for advanced Christ consciousness practices, and comment, which obstacle are you ready to transform through Joel Goldsmith's wisdom? Joel taught advanced practitioners to carry Christ consciousness into daily activity, not just meditation. This is where theory becomes practical demonstration. You're in a business meeting and tension rises. Traditional response is to react, defend, or attack. Christ consciousness response is to silently recognize that only God is present here. Not God watching the meeting, but God as the only consciousness actually operating. This takes practice. Your human personality wants to engage in the drama. Joel taught that you can function in the human world while remaining anchored in spiritual awareness. You speak when necessary, act when required, but you're not lost in the appearance of conflict. You're recognizing that beneath all human interaction, there's only one divine consciousness temporarily appearing as many personalities. Linda practiced this in her toxic workplace. Instead of quitting or fighting, she began silently recognizing Christ consciousness as the only presence. When her boss attacked her, she didn't take it personally because she recognized both of them as divine consciousness having a human experience. The external behavior didn't immediately change, but her inner peace became unshakable. Over 6 months, something remarkable happened. Either her boss softened significantly, or Linda was moved to a different department, or she was guided to a new job. Joel taught that when you hold spiritual consciousness steady, the external must eventually conform. You don't know how or when. You simply practice presence and trust that consciousness knows what needs to happen. Another advanced practice Joel taught was recognizing perfection in apparent imperfection. Someone is ill. Traditional response is to pray for healing. Joel's advanced teaching was to recognize that in spiritual consciousness, there is no illness to heal. The body's appearance doesn't determine spiritual reality. This doesn't mean ignoring medical care. It means recognizing truth while dealing with appearance. David's daughter was diagnosed with a serious condition. Every instinct said to panic, to beg God for intervention. Joel had taught David to practice presence even in crisis. David sat with his fear, acknowledged it, and then practiced recognizing his daughter's true spiritual identity as whole, complete, and perfect, not denying her symptoms, but refusing to accept them as ultimate reality. The treatment process was difficult. There were setbacks and scary moments, but David maintained spiritual consciousness throughout. He didn't make healing the goal. He made recognition of truth the practice. Whether the body healed or not, his daughter's spiritual identity remained forever perfect. This consciousness gave both of them peace that transcended circumstances. The body did heal, but that's not the point. Joel taught dozens of students whose bodies didn't heal but whose consciousness awakened to eternal life. Physical healing is wonderful when it happens. Consciousness awakening to its divine nature is the real transformation. When you practice this advanced recognition, you're no longer at the mercy of external circumstances. You've found the peace that passes understanding. Joel's most advanced teaching addressed the problem of evil. How do you practice Christ consciousness when facing genuine malice, violence, or cruelty? Traditional religion says evil is real and God will punish it. Joel taught something radically different. Evil has no power except the power you give it through belief. This isn't naive optimism. This is spiritual law. When Jesus said, "Resist not evil," he wasn't teaching passivity. He was revealing that evil is appearance without ultimate reality. The moment you resist it, you make it real in your consciousness. The moment you fight it, you empower it. Joel taught that the only way to overcome evil is to recognize its nothingness. Not that it doesn't appear to harm, but that it has no actual power in spiritual reality. This is terrifying to practice. Someone wrongs you severely. Your mind demands justice, revenge, or at minimum acknowledgement of the evil done. Joel taught that this response keeps you trapped in the consciousness that attracted the experience. The way through is recognizing that evil is simply good misunderstood, truth forgotten, love temporarily obscured by human confusion. As you practice this recognition, something extraordinary happens. Either the situation resolves in ways you couldn't have orchestrated, or you're removed from it, or you develop such inner peace that external circumstances lose their power to disturb you. Joel wasn't teaching you to accept abuse. He was showing you how to free yourself from evil's power through recognition of its unreality. The final advanced practice Joel taught was becoming a transparent consciousness. This means you're so established in Christ consciousness that you become a healing presence without doing anything. People feel peace around you. Situations resolve when you enter them. Not because you're special, but because consciousness operating through you recognizes only spiritual reality. Joel reached this state after decades of practice. He would sit in a room and simply be present. People reported physical healings, emotional breakthroughs, spiritual awakenings. He wasn't doing anything to them. His consciousness was simply so clear of personal agenda that divine consciousness could operate unobstructed. This is the goal of all spiritual practice. Complete transparency to truth. You don't achieve this through effort. You achieve it through persistent recognition of what's already true. Every day, you practice presence. Every challenge, you recognize Christ consciousness. Every interaction, you see divine identity beneath human personality. Over years, not days or months, consciousness becomes so established that it operates automatically. This is what Jesus demonstrated. He wasn't born special. He achieved complete transparency to Christ consciousness through practice and recognition. Joel taught that this same achievement is available to you, not because you're better than others, but because consciousness itself is your true identity. As you practice these advanced tools, you're not becoming something new. You're recognizing what you've always been beneath the layers of false belief. After decades of teaching, Joel reflected on what he'd learned about transformation. The process isn't linear. You don't climb a ladder from unconsciousness to enlightenment. You have moments of profound recognition followed by periods of forgetting. The practice is returning to presence each time you realize you've left it. This is the spiritual journey, not arriving, but continuously returning. Some students experience dramatic healings and life changes within months. Others practiced for years before seeing external results. Joel discovered that timing wasn't the issue. Depth of realization was what mattered. You could practice for decades with shallow understanding and see limited change. Or you could have one moment of profound recognition that transformed everything instantly. The key wasn't how long you practiced, but how deeply you recognized truth. One student had a single meditation where Christ consciousness became absolutely real, not as concept, but as experienced reality. Her life transformed within weeks. Another student practiced diligently for 5 years and finally had the recognition during a walk in nature. Suddenly, everything Joel taught clicked into place. Joel himself said his deepest recognitions came after 40 years of practice. He thought he understood Christ consciousness early on, but each decade revealed deeper layers. He remained humble, acknowledging he was still learning, still discovering new dimensions of spiritual truth. This humility kept him open to revelation. The moment you think you've arrived, you've stopped growing. Joel's teaching about Jesus ultimately comes down to this. Jesus wasn't God's only son. He was the first to fully demonstrate what divine sonship means. He came to show you what you are, not to be the only one who is it. Every miracle he performed was meant to wake you up to your own spiritual power. Every teaching he gave was instruction for your transformation. When you practice Christ consciousness, you're not worshiping Jesus. You're following his actual instruction. He said, "Learn of me, not worship me." He said, "You are the light of the world, not I am the only light." He said, "The kingdom of heaven is within you, not within me alone." The church changed his message because awakened people don't need institutions. This understanding restores Jesus to his rightful role, spiritual teacher and way-shower, not distant deity requiring intermediaries. You have direct access to the same source he accessed. You have the same divine identity he recognized. You can demonstrate the same spiritual laws he demonstrated, not because you're special, but because consciousness itself is what you are. Joel spent his life proving this works. Thousands of students demonstrated healing, transformation, and spiritual awakening through his teaching. Not because Joel had special power, but because he accurately taught what Jesus actually meant. The truth was always there in the Gospels. It just got buried under layers of doctrine designed to keep you dependent and small. The practice doesn't end. Christ consciousness isn't a destination you reach and then coast. It's a living, breathing awareness you maintain moment by moment. Some days you feel clearly established in truth. Other days you forget completely and get lost in appearances. Joel taught that this is normal and expected. You're human, experiencing divine consciousness. The journey is eternal. What changes is your relationship with forgetting. Early on, you might forget for days or weeks before remembering to practice. As consciousness establishes, you notice forgetting sooner. Eventually, you might forget for only moments before presence returns. The goal isn't never forgetting. The goal is shortening the time between forgetting and remembering. Joel practiced until his death at age 73. Even then, he said he was still learning, still discovering new dimensions of Christ consciousness. This should encourage you. You're not trying to achieve perfection. You're practicing presence. Every moment you recognize truth, consciousness establishes more deeply. Every time you return to presence after forgetting, the return becomes easier. Your spiritual journey is unique. Your timing is your own. Your challenges are specifically designed for your awakening. Joel taught that everything in your experience is consciousness revealing itself. The pleasant and the painful, the easy and the difficult, all serve the same purpose, waking you up to what you've always been but temporarily forgot. Here's what Joel ultimately discovered after 50 years of practice and teaching. The entire spiritual journey is about recognizing what's already true. You're not becoming divine. You're recognizing divinity as your nature. You're not earning God's love. You're accepting that love is what you are. You're not acquiring Christ consciousness. You're removing the beliefs that obscure your awareness of it. This truth changes everything about how you live. Prayer becomes recognition instead of petition. Challenges become opportunities for deeper realization instead of problems to solve. Other people become mirrors showing you aspects of consciousness instead of separate individuals to judge or control. Every moment becomes sacred because every moment is consciousness experiencing itself. The relationship with Jesus transforms completely. He's no longer the distant savior you beg for help. He's the elder brother who showed you the way home. His life demonstrated what's possible when human consciousness fully recognizes its divine identity. His teaching provides the roadmap for your own awakening. His love supports you as you walk the path he walked. Joel's legacy is this. He restored Jesus' original teaching from beneath 2,000 years of religious distortion. He proved that ordinary people can experience extraordinary spiritual transformation through recognizing Christ consciousness. He demonstrated that healing, peace, and abundance flow naturally when consciousness aligns with spiritual truth. The practice works. The question is, will you practice? If your spiritual understanding of Jesus and your divine nature has been revolutionized by these Joel Goldsmith revelations, like this video to help others discover this hidden truth, subscribe for more mystical Christianity teachings that transform lives, and comment, "I am transformed," to confirm your new consciousness and spiritual path.
At this very moment, something extraordinary is happening. You believe you are listening to words, but what if I told you that the same consciousness speaking these words is the very consciousness reading them? What if the I that speaks and the I that listens are not two but one? This is not poetry, this is not metaphor, this is the hidden power that Jesus revealed when he said, "I am the way, the truth, and the life." And until you discover what that I truly is, you will search for power, truth, and life where they can never be found in the world of effects, rather than in the invisible cause. The great mistake of spiritual seeking, my dear friends, we must begin by acknowledging a mistake that has been made throughout centuries of spiritual seeking, a mistake so fundamental that it has kept humanity in bondage even while reading the most sacred scriptures. When Jesus spoke those profound words, "I am the way, the truth, and the life," the world made an assumption. It assumed he was speaking of Jesus of Nazareth, the man. It assumed he was claiming exclusive authority for his person, and in that assumption the hidden power was lost. But the mystic knows differently. The illumined soul understands that Jesus was not speaking of his human form, but of the I am that dwelt in him. The same I am that dwells in you, in me, in all of creation. He was revealing the secret of secrets, that the Christ, the I am, is universal, infinite, and indivisible. The nature of I am. Let us go deeper into meditation now. Close your eyes for a moment and silently declare, "I am." What have you said? Have you spoken of your body? No, the body cannot say I am. Have you spoken of your thoughts? No, thoughts come and go, but the I am remains. You have touched something eternal, something that was never born and can never die. This I am is not your personal possession. You cannot improve it, you cannot diminish it. It's simply I-S. And this is the great revelation. The I am that you are is the same I am. That was in Jesus, that was in Buddha, that is in every realized soul. There are not many I ams, there is only one, appearing as the many. The I am is not personal possession, but universal presence. When we claim I am, we are not speaking of our limited human self, but touching the infinite consciousness that animates all life. When we utter those two simple words I am, we stand at the threshold of the greatest mystery and the most practical truth ever revealed to humanity. Yet how casually we speak them throughout our day. I am tired, I am worried, I am struggling. In each utterance, we unwittingly claim something that is either profoundly true or dangerously false, depending upon what we believe that I to be. The human tendency is to personalize everything. We say my consciousness, my understanding, my spiritual development, as though consciousness were something we possess, like a garment we can put on or take off. This is the fundamental error that keeps us in bondage. We believe that the I am is personal to us, that it is something we own, something that is ours exclusively, something that can be improved upon or diminished by our actions. But the mystic discovers something entirely different in the deep silence of meditation. When all thought subsides, when the chattering mind becomes still, when even the sense of personal self begins to dissolve, what remains? There remains a pure awareness, a consciousness that simply I says. This consciousness does not belong to you, you appear in it. It is not your possession, you are its expression. It is not limited to your body or your thoughts. It is infinite, eternal, and indivisible. Consider the sun and its rays. Can a single ray of sunlight say, I have my own light separate from the sun? No, the ray is simply the sun expressing itself in that particular direction. Remove the sun, and the ray ceases to exist. The ray has no independent reality apart from the sun. In precisely the same way, you have no independent reality apart from the infinite I am. What you call I is simply universal presence expressing itself as the form you call your life. This is not poetry or pleasant philosophy meant to comfort us. This is the actual nature of existence, and when we realize it, everything changes. The moment you stop believing that I am is your personal possession and recognize it as universal presence, temporarily focused as you, the burden of personal responsibility for all things lifts. You are no longer required to be the creator, the sustainer, the healer, the supplier. Those are the functions of I am, the infinite consciousness that is actually living your life. Think of how the ocean and a wave relate. The wave rises from the ocean, moves across its surface, and returns to the ocean. Does the wave have an existence separate from the ocean? No, it is always and only the ocean, temporarily taking the form of a wave. The wave cannot say, I have my own water, my own power, my own life. Its water is ocean water, its power is ocean power, its life is ocean life. Yet while it appears as a wave, it can express the full nature of the ocean, its depth, its power, its life-giving properties. You are that wave. I am is that ocean. When Jesus declared, I am the way, the truth, and the life, he was not speaking as Jesus the wave, claiming superiority over other waves. He was speaking as one who had realized his wave nature was completely inseparable from the ocean nature. He had discovered that his I and the infinite I am were not two things trying to become one, but one thing that had never been divided. This recognition transforms everything because suddenly you understand you are not a limited human being trying to reach an unlimited God. You are unlimited God appearing temporarily as a human being. The power you seek is not something you must acquire or develop. It is the very substance of your being, waiting only to be recognized and allowed to flow freely through your transparency. Truth is not intellectual belief but lived experience. The way, truth, and life are not concepts to be studied but spiritual realities to be realized in the silence of our being. Throughout the centuries, humanity has accumulated vast libraries of spiritual knowledge. We have scriptures, commentaries, interpretations, doctrines, and theological frameworks attempting to capture truth in words and concepts. Students spend lifetimes memorizing sacred texts, analyzing their meanings, debating their interpretations. Yet all of this intellectual activity, while perhaps valuable as preparation, remains in the realm of belief rather than realization. Truth, in its living essence, cannot be captured in words any more than you can capture sunlight in a box. When we speak of truth as lived experience rather than intellectual belief, we are pointing to something that can only be known through direct encounter. Consider how different it is to read about love in a book versus experiencing love in your heart. You can study every poem ever written about love, master every philosophical theory about its nature, yet remain completely ignorant of what love actually is until you experience it directly. The moment love floods your being, all the books become unnecessary. You know, not because you have been convinced by arguments, but because you have tasted the reality itself. This is precisely the relationship between spiritual concepts and spiritual realization. You can believe that God is omnipresent, you can memorize verses that declare it, you can argue eloquently in its defense. But until you have sat in deep silence and felt the actual presence permeating your being, filling the room, dissolving the boundaries between inner and outer, you have only a concept, not a realization. The concept lives in your mind, the realization transforms your entire existence. Jesus did not say study the way or believe in the truth or understand the life. He said, I am these things. The statement is immediate, present tense, experiential. When he spoke those words, he was not reciting doctrine. He was bearing witness to what he was experiencing in that moment. The way was not a path he had read about. It was the living reality moving through him. The truth was not a belief system he had adopted. It was the eternal presence he consciously lived in. The life was not a theory about existence. It was the infinite vitality flowing as his very being. This distinction between intellectual belief and lived experience becomes crucial in practical spiritual living. When trouble comes, and it does come to everyone, intellectual belief offers little comfort. You can repeat affirmations, quote scriptures, remind yourself of what you believe, yet the fear remains, the pain persists, the problem looms large. Why? Because you are still operating in the realm of thought, and thought cannot overcome thought. One belief system battles another, one fear counters another hope, and you remain trapped in mental gymnastics. But when truth is lived experience, when you have actually touched the presence in meditation, when you have felt the reality of I am permeating your consciousness, then in moments of trouble you have somewhere to return. You do not return to a belief, you return to an experience. You become still, you move into that inner sanctuary where you once encountered the presence, and you wait, not hoping it might appear, but knowing it is already there, because you have been there before. This is not faith in a concept, this is confidence born of experience. The mystics of all ages have testified to this distinction. They speak not as theologians presenting arguments, but as witnesses reporting what they have seen, felt, and known. When Ramana Maharshi pointed seekers to the question, "Who am I?" he was not asking for an intellectual answer, he was inviting them into a direct experience of their own true nature. When the Quakers sit in silence, they are not thinking about God, they are waiting to experience the living presence. When the contemplative enters deep meditation, she is not reviewing her beliefs, she is opening herself to direct encounter with reality itself. This lived experience cannot be transmitted through words, yet it can be awakened through silence, through practice, through the dedication to go beyond thinking about truth into experiencing truth. The hidden power lies in recognition, not acquisition. We do not gain spiritual power, we awaken to the power that has always been present within us as our true nature. One of the most persistent illusions on the spiritual path is the belief that we are seeking something we do not have. We approach spirituality as beggars approaching a king, as empty vessels hoping to be filled, as powerless beings trying to gain power. We pray as though God were distant. We meditate as though we were trying to manufacture consciousness. We seek enlightenment as though it were a prize to be won through sufficient effort. This entire approach, though sincere and well-intentioned, rests upon a fundamental misunderstanding of our true nature. The hidden power lies not in acquisition but in recognition. You do not need to gain spiritual power because you already are spiritual power expressing itself in human form. You do not need to find God because God is the very consciousness with which you are searching. You do not need to become enlightened because your true nature has never been in darkness. The entire journey, then, is not about getting somewhere, but about awakening to where you already are. Imagine a prince raised by peasants, unaware of his royal heritage. He lives in poverty, struggles for survival, and dreams of one day becoming wealthy and important. Then one day a messenger arrives with proof of his true identity. In that moment of recognition, does the prince acquire royalty? No, he was royal all along. The recognition does not create his status, it simply reveals what has always been true. All that changes is his awareness of who he truly is. Yet this change in awareness transforms everything about how he lives. This is your situation exactly. You are not a powerless human being who might, through great effort and good fortune, someday acquire spiritual power. You are spiritual power itself, temporarily wearing the costume of human limitation, having forgotten your true identity. The power is not waiting somewhere in the future, contingent upon your worthiness or your effort. It is present now, in this very moment, as the consciousness reading these words, as the life beating your heart, as the intelligence organizing every cell in your body without your conscious direction. Why then do we not experience this power? Not because it is absent, but because we are looking in the wrong direction. We are seeking in the outer world what can only be found through inner recognition. We are trying to acquire through doing what can only be revealed through being. It is as though we were standing in bright sunlight, eyes closed, complaining about the darkness and praying for light to appear. The light is already present, we need only open our eyes. This recognition happens not through mental effort, but through a shift in awareness, through what might be called spiritual awakening or conscious realization. In meditation, when the mind becomes still and the constant chatter of thought subsides, there comes a moment, sometimes fleeting, sometimes sustained, when you simply know. You know not as an intellectual conclusion, but as a direct experience that the presence you have been seeking is the very presence you are. The power you have been praying for is the power that enables you to pray. The life you have been trying to find is the life that has been living you all along. This recognition, once experienced, can never be completely forgotten. Even when you return to ordinary consciousness, even when you again become caught up in the dramas and struggles of human existence, somewhere deep within you remember. You remember that beneath all appearance of limitation, beneath all sense of separation, there is an infinite power that is your true nature. And with each return to this recognition in meditation, with each moment of conscious awareness that I am is present here and now, this recognition deepens, stabilizes, and begins to transform your entire experience of life. The shift from seeking to recognizing is the shift from effort to grace, from struggle to surrender, from becoming to being. It marks the end of the spiritual search and the beginning of spiritual living. Claude is AI and can make mistakes. Please double-check responses. One of the most persistent illusions on the spiritual path is the belief that we are seeking something we do not have. We approach spirituality as beggars approaching a king, as empty vessels hoping to be filled, as powerless beings trying to gain power. We pray as though God were distant. We meditate as though we were trying to manufacture consciousness. We seek enlightenment as though it were a prize to be won through sufficient effort. This entire approach, though sincere and well-intentioned, rests upon a fundamental misunderstanding of our true nature. The hidden power lies not in acquisition but in recognition. You do not need to gain spiritual power because you already are spiritual power expressing itself in human form. You do not need to find God, because God is the very consciousness with which you are searching. You do not need to become enlightened, because your true nature has never been in darkness. The entire journey, then, is not about getting somewhere, but about awakening to where you already are. Imagine a prince raised by peasants, unaware of his royal heritage. He lives in poverty, struggles for survival, and dreams of one day becoming wealthy and important. Then, one day a messenger arrives with proof of his true identity. In that moment of recognition, does the prince acquire royalty? No, he was royal all along. The recognition does not create his status, it simply reveals what has always been true. All that changes is his awareness of who he truly is, yet this change in awareness transforms everything about how he lives. This is your situation exactly. You are not a powerless human being who might, through great effort and good fortune, someday acquire spiritual power. You are spiritual power itself, temporarily wearing the costume of human limitation, having forgotten your true identity. The power is not waiting somewhere in the future, contingent upon your worthiness or your effort. It is present now, in this very moment, as the consciousness reading these words, as the life beating your heart, as the intelligence organizing every cell in your body without your conscious direction. Why then do we not experience this power? Not because it is absent, but because we are looking in the wrong direction. We are seeking in the outer world what can only be found through inner recognition. We are trying to acquire through doing what can only be revealed through being. It is as though we were standing in bright sunlight, eyes closed, complaining about the darkness and praying for light to appear. The light is already present. We need only open our eyes. This recognition happens not through mental effort, but through a shift in awareness, through what might be called spiritual awakening or conscious realization. In meditation, when the mind becomes still and the constant chatter of thought subsides, there comes a moment, sometimes fleeting, sometimes sustained, when you simply know. You know not as an intellectual conclusion, but as a direct experience that the presence you have been seeking is the very presence you are. The power you have been praying for is the power that enables you to pray. The life you have been trying to find is the life that has been living you all along. This recognition, once experienced, can never be completely forgotten. Even when you return to ordinary consciousness, even when you again become caught up in the dramas and struggles of human existence, somewhere deep within you remember. You remember that beneath all appearance of limitation, beneath all sense of separation, there is an infinite power that is your true nature. And with each return to this recognition in meditation, with each moment of conscious awareness that I am is present here and now, this recognition deepens, stabilizes, and begins to transform your entire experience of life. The shift from seeking to recognizing is the shift from effort to grace, from struggle to surrender, from becoming to being. It marks the end of the spiritual search and the beginning of spiritual living. Separation is the only illusion we must transcend. When we understand there is no you and God, but only one infinite I am expressing, we discover the hidden power. If we were to identify the single illusion that causes all human suffering, all sense of lack, all experience of fear and limitation, it would be this: the belief in separation. This is not merely one illusion among many, it is the root illusion from which all others spring. When we believe ourselves to be separate from God, separate from each other, separate from the infinite source of all good, we condemn ourselves to a life of struggle, seeking, and inevitable disappointment. Yet this separation, which seems so real and so absolute, has no actual existence. It is the grand illusion, the cosmic misunderstanding, the veil that must be lifted before the hidden power can be revealed. Consider how completely this illusion dominates human experience. We speak of my life and God's life as though there were two lives. We pray to God as though God was somewhere else, listening from a distance. We seek guidance as though wisdom were external to us. We pursue supply as though abundance existed outside our own consciousness. In every moment, in countless subtle ways, we reinforce the belief that we are here and God is there, that we are separate entities trying to establish connection with the divine. But what if this entire framework is false? What if there has never been even one moment of actual separation? What if what we call you and what we call God are not two things at all, but simply two names for the one infinite consciousness expressing itself in apparently individual forms? This is not pantheism, which says everything is God. This is the mystical realization that there is only God, appearing as everything, and that your individual sense of I is simply the infinite I am experiencing itself from one particular focal point. When Jesus declared I and the Father are one, he was not describing a special achievement unique to himself. He was revealing the actual nature of all existence. He had awakened from the dream of separation into the recognition of unity. He no longer experienced himself as Jesus trying to reach God, but as God expressing as Jesus. The separation that had seemed so real dissolved in the light of recognition, and he discovered that he had never been separate for even one instant. The hidden power inside, I am the way, the truth, and the life, was never really hidden at all. It has been shouting its presence in every heartbeat, declaring itself in every breath, revealing itself in every moment of awareness. We simply were not listening. We were too busy seeking what we already possessed, too occupied with becoming what we already are, too distracted by the world of effects to recognize the infinite cause dwelling as our very consciousness. You have learned today that the I Am is not your personal possession, but universal presence, the one infinite consciousness appearing as all that exists. You have discovered that truth is not intellectual belief, but lived experience, something to be tasted in the silence of your being, not merely studied in the activity of your mind. You have recognized that the hidden power lies not in acquisition, but in recognition, the simple awakening to what has always been true. You have understood that separation is the only illusion you must transcend, the fundamental misunderstanding that creates all sense of lack, fear, and limitation. And you have seen that living from this consciousness transforms every moment, making spirituality not a Sunday practice, but the very foundation of practical daily living. But knowing these truths intellectually accomplishes nothing. The question now is, what will you do with what you have heard? Will you file this away as interesting philosophy, or will you begin today, this very moment, to live from this consciousness? I invite you to make a commitment, not to me, but to your own awakening. Beginning now, practice the presence of I Am. When you wake in the morning, before your feet touch the floor, pause and recognize, I Am is awake in me as me. As you go about your day, when challenges arise, when decisions must be made, when fear whispers its lies, stop and remember, I Am is the only power and presence here. Do not make this a burden, another spiritual task to accomplish. Make it a homecoming, a return to your true nature, a resting in what already is. You are not trying to become spiritual, you are recognizing the spirituality that has never left you. You are not trying to gain power, you are awakening to the power that is already living your life. And here is what I promise you, not as hope or speculation, but as testimony from one who has walked this path. As you live from this consciousness, as you make I am your dwelling place rather than the shifting sands of human opinion and circumstance, you will discover a peace that the world cannot give and cannot take away. You will find the doors open before you without struggle, that supply flows to you without anxiety, that wisdom speaks through you without effort, that healing manifests around you without technique. This is not because you have become special or earned divine favor. It is simply because you have stopped blocking the natural flow of infinite good with the belief in separation and limitation. You have stepped aside from your own imagined self and allowed I am to live as you, to think as you, to act as you, to be you. Remember, you are not a human being having occasional spiritual experiences. You are infinite spirit having a temporary human experience. You are not a wave trying to reach the ocean. You are the ocean appearing as a wave. You are not a ray of light seeking the sun. You are the sun expressing itself as a ray. Jesus revealed this truth 2,000 years ago. The mystics of every tradition have confirmed it throughout the ages. And now it has been presented to you, not as ancient history, but as present reality. The same I am that spoke through Jesus speaks through you. The same truth that illumined the Buddha illumines your consciousness. The same life that animated all the saints and sages is the life beating your heart in this very moment. Do not wait for a more convenient time to begin living from this truth. Do not postpone your awakening until you feel more worthy or more prepared. The time is now. This moment is your moment. This breath is your opportunity. Go forth from this place not as you came, as a seeker looking for truth, but as truth itself made manifest in human form. Go forth not trying to demonstrate God, but allowing God to demonstrate as you. Go forth not hoping for the kingdom of heaven to come, but knowing it is already established within you as your true nature. And whenever you forget, and you will forget, for the habit of human thinking is strong, simply pause, breathe, and remember I am is the way. Not tomorrow, not when conditions improve, not when you become more spiritual, now, here, always. In deepest silence, with profound reverence I am is present where you are, not as something separate from you, but as the very consciousness with which you understand these words. That which you seek, you already are. That which you hope to become, you have always been. That which you long to experience is experiencing itself as you in this eternal now. Be still and know. The hidden power is no longer hidden. It stands revealed as your own true self. Amen. And so it is. Imagine for a moment that everything you've ever criticized in another person was actually a mirror held up to your own consciousness. Every harsh word, every silent condemnation, every they should know better was really you, struggling with something unresolved within yourself. What if Jesus wasn't giving us a moral rule when he said, "Judge not"? What if he was revealing the secret to inner freedom? My friends, we come together today not to add another burden to your shoulders, but to lift one off, a burden so heavy, so exhausting, that most of us don't even realize we're carrying it. It's the burden of judgment. When Jesus spoke those transformative words, "Judge not," he wasn't delivering a commandment in the traditional sense. He was revealing a spiritual principle, a law of consciousness as exact as any law of physics. He was showing us the pathway to our own liberation, the nature of judgment. What is judgment, really? It's the human mind believing it has the wisdom to evaluate, condemn, or approve of another's spiritual journey. It's the ego presuming to know what God alone can know. Every time we judge another person, we're essentially saying, I know better than the divine intelligence that created this being. But here's the mystical truth that sets us free. When you judge another, you're not really seeing them at all. You're seeing your own state of consciousness projected outward. The critical thought you have about your neighbor, that's your consciousness speaking about itself. The condemnation you feel towards someone's choices, that's revealing what's unreconciled within you. This is why Jesus connected judgment so directly to our own experience. For with what judgment ye judge, ye shall be judged. This isn't punishment, it's spiritual law. The consciousness that condemns outside must experience condemnation within. The mind that criticizes others lives in a state of self-criticism. The illusion of separation, we judge because we believe in separation. We see ourselves as distinct, separate entities with the right and ability to evaluate other separate entities. But this is the grand illusion. In spiritual reality, there is only one life, one consciousness, one divine presence expressing itself infinitely. When you understand this, really understand it in your innermost being, judgment becomes impossible. How can the ocean judge one of its waves? How can the sun condemn one of its rays? You are that inseparable from every being you encounter. The practice of spiritual discernment, now some will say, but surely we must discern right from wrong. We must have standards. Yes, but discernment and judgment are entirely different faculties. Discernment is wisdom, judgment is condemnation. Discernment says, this action brings harmony, that one brings discord. Judgment says, this person is wrong, bad, or less than. Jesus himself demonstrated this perfectly. He discerned the consciousness of those he met. He saw through human appearances to spiritual reality, but he never condemned the person. Neither do I condemn thee, he told the woman caught in adultery. He was demonstrating a consciousness so elevated that it could witness human failings without judging the individual. Your divine assignment, here's your spiritual assignment, and it's the most liberating work you'll ever do. Begin to catch yourself in the act of judgment. Not to condemn yourself for judging, that would just be more judgment, but simply to notice. Ah, there's a judgment. And in that moment of awareness, ask yourself, what is this judgment revealing about my own consciousness? When you find yourself critical of someone's materialism, ask yourself where you're still attached to material things or afraid of not having enough. When you judge someone's anger, inquire into your own unexpressed anger. This isn't psychotherapy, this is spiritual alchemy. You're transmuting the lead of judgment into the gold of self-awareness. Living in the sacred now, as you practice this release from judgment, something miraculous happens. You begin to live in what I call the sacred now, a state of consciousness where you meet each person fresh, without the overlay of past conditioning, without the projection of your opinions and beliefs. In this state, you can actually see people, not your idea of them, not your story about them, but their true spiritual nature. This is seeing through the Christ consciousness, and it changes everything. Where you once saw a difficult person, you now see a divine being having a human experience. Where you once saw failure, you now see a soul learning and growing. The freedom that awaits, my dear friends, when you truly stop judging others, you'll discover something wonderful. You've stopped judging yourself. The inner critic falls silent. The constant measuring and evaluating ceases. In its place comes a peace that truly does pass understanding. This is the promise Jesus held out to us, not as a distant reward, but as a present reality available the moment we shift our consciousness. When we stand before another human being and pass judgment upon them, we believe we are seeing them clearly, objectively, as they truly are. We think our criticism is accurate, our assessment is fair, our condemnation is justified. But this is one of the great illusions of human consciousness. In truth, when you judge another person, you are not seeing them at all. You are seeing yourself. Every judgment you make is a mirror held up to your own consciousness. The faults you so readily identify in others are the very qualities that live, often unexamined, within your own mind. The behaviors that trigger your harshest criticism are frequently the shadows you refuse to acknowledge in yourself. When you declare someone else to be arrogant, dishonest, or selfish, you are confessing what occupies your own mental and emotional landscape. This is not a matter of psychology or personal opinion. This is spiritual law. Consciousness cannot perceive what it does not contain. You cannot recognize a quality in another unless that quality exists somewhere within your own awareness. The thief sees theft everywhere. The liar suspects everyone of lying. The jealous person imagines jealousy in every relationship they observe. Consider how this operates in your daily life. You meet someone, and within moments you have catalogued their flaws, their weaknesses, their failures. You have judged their appearance, their manner of speaking, their choices, their character. And you feel certain that your assessment is objective, that you are simply seeing reality as it is. But what you are actually doing is projecting the contents of your own consciousness onto them. You are using them as a screen upon which to display your own fears, insecurities, and unresolved conflicts. The tragedy is that the person you judge may walk away completely unaffected by your silent condemnation, while you must carry the weight of that judgment indefinitely. It becomes part of your mental atmosphere, your emotional climate, the very air you breathe. You have imprisoned yourself with your own thoughts, built walls with your own criticisms, created separation with your own condemnations. The mirror of judgment always reflects back upon the one who holds it, and what it shows us is not the other person's reality, but our own consciousness staring back at us. The greatest spiritual truth that Jesus demonstrated throughout his ministry was this: he saw divinity where others saw only humanity. He perceived the Christ presence where others perceived only sinners, tax collectors, prostitutes, and outcasts. This was not naive optimism or willful blindness to human error. This was spiritual vision, the ability to look beyond the temporary manifestation of human behavior to the eternal reality of divine being that exists in every soul. When we operate from ordinary human consciousness, we see only appearances. We see the mistakes people make, the limitations they exhibit, the darkness they seem to carry. We become fixated on their past actions, their current struggles, their apparent failures, and in seeing only this surface reality, we miss the profound truth that lies beneath. Every person, regardless of their behavior or circumstances, is an expression of the infinite divine consciousness. The Christ dwells within them just as surely as it dwells within the saint. This is perhaps the most challenging aspect of spiritual awakening learning, to see past the human drama to the divine reality. It requires a complete transformation of perception. You must train yourself to look at the alcoholic and see the Christ temporarily obscured by addiction. You must look at the angry person and recognize the divine presence momentarily clouded by pain. You must look at the one who has harmed you and acknowledge the God-self that exists beneath their unconscious behavior. This doesn't mean you condone harmful actions or pretend that destructive behavior is acceptable. It means you develop the capacity to hold two truths simultaneously. Yes, This person is acting from unconsciousness, and yes, the divine presence still resides within them. Yes, their behavior may be unacceptable, and yes, their essential nature remains untouched by their actions. Yes, they may need correction or consequences, and yes, they are still worthy of recognition as spiritual beings. When you develop this Christ vision, something extraordinary happens. You stop reacting to people from fear, anger, or superiority. You begin responding from a deeper place of understanding and compassion. You can still maintain boundaries, still protect yourself, still speak truth to error. But you do so without that poisonous energy of condemnation that judgment always carries. You see the person as they truly are in spiritual reality, even while acknowledging where they currently stand in human experience. The human mind is constantly busy with the exhausting work of evaluation. From morning until night we assess, criticize, approve, and condemn. We judge the driver who cuts us off, the co-worker who speaks too loudly, the politician whose views differ from ours, the family member who disappoints us. We carry these judgments like heavy stones in an invisible bag, accumulating more weight with each passing hour, each passing day, each passing year. What we fail to recognize is that every judgment we hold is a chain that binds us. Every criticism we maintain is a lock on our own prison cell. We think we are merely observing reality, expressing valid opinions, or protecting ourselves from harm. But in truth, we are creating our own captivity. The mind that constantly judges is never at peace. It cannot rest. It cannot be still. It is forever scanning, evaluating, finding fault, and building cases against the world and everyone in it. True spiritual freedom begins the moment you release your need to judge. Not because someone has commanded you to stop, not because it's the morally correct thing to do, but because you finally recognize that judgment serves no purpose except to keep you imprisoned in a state of separation and conflict. When you let go of the compulsion to evaluate everyone and everything around you, a space opens within your consciousness. A vast, peaceful space where love can enter, where understanding can flourish, where compassion can flow freely. This liberation doesn't happen through force or willpower. You cannot judge yourself into not judging. The freedom comes through recognition, through seeing clearly that the judging mind is the suffering mind. Every time you release a judgment, you feel lighter. Every time you choose not to condemn, you breathe more easily. Every time you look at another human being without mentally cataloging their faults, you experience a moment of genuine peace. And here is the beautiful paradox. The less you judge others, the less you judge yourself. The compassion you extend outward inevitably flows inward. The mercy you offer to another becomes the mercy you receive. The freedom you grant to others by releasing your judgments of them becomes your own freedom. You discover that you were never really judging them at all. You were judging life itself, and in doing so, judging your own existence. When judgment falls away, what remains is the natural state of your being, open, free, at peace, and capable of genuine love. At the deepest level of reality, there is no separation between you and any other living being. This is not poetry or metaphor. This is the fundamental truth of existence. We are all waves in the same ocean, rays of the same sun, expressions of the same infinite consciousness. What appears as separate individuals, each with distinct personalities, histories, and destinies, is really the one divine presence manifesting in countless forms. When you truly grasp this truth, judgment becomes impossible, for how can you condemn another without condemning yourself? Yet judgment thrives on the illusion of separation. It requires us to believe that we are fundamentally different from those we judge, that we are over here and they are over there, that we are good and they are bad, that we are enlightened and they are ignorant, that we are worthy and they are not. Every judgment we make reinforces this false sense of division. It builds invisible walls between ourselves and others, creating a world of isolation where everyone stands alone, separate, competing for worth and value. This separation is perhaps the greatest source of human suffering. When you judge another, you cut yourself off from the flow of divine love that seeks to move through you. You cannot simultaneously condemn someone and remain connected to the universal consciousness that embraces all. You cannot hold yourself apart in superiority and experience the joy of unity. You cannot build walls of judgment and expect to feel the freedom of boundless connection. The spiritual journey is really a journey from separation back to unity, from the illusion of division back to the recognition of oneness. Every time you judge another person, you take a step backward into isolation. Every time you release judgment and recognize the divine presence in another, you take a step forward into the truth of your being. You remember that their struggles are your struggles, their pain is your pain, their awakening is your awakening. You are not separate observers of each other's lives. You are participants in the same eternal dance of consciousness discovering itself. When this recognition deepens in you, compassion arises naturally, not as something you must force yourself to feel, but as the inevitable response to seeing truly. How can you be harsh with another when you recognize they are you in a different form? How can you condemn when you understand that their unconsciousness is the same unconsciousness that has at times clouded your own awareness? The illusion of separation dissolves, and what remains is the simple, profound truth: we are one. The judgments we carry are rarely about the present moment. They are accumulated residue from the past old grievances, remembered slights, catalogued failures, and stored disappointments. When you judge someone today, you are almost never seeing them as they actually are in this moment. You are seeing them through the lens of yesterday, last week, last year, or even decades ago. You are relating to a memory, not to a living, breathing, evolving human being who stands before you now. This is one of the most tragic aspects of judgment. It freezes people in time. It takes someone's worst moment and declares it to be their eternal identity. It takes a mistake they made years ago and insists that this mistake defines who they are today. The person may have grown, changed, learned, and transformed, but your judgment refuses to acknowledge this possibility. You hold them captive to their past, and in doing so, you hold yourself captive as well, unable to experience the freshness and possibility of the present moment. True spiritual awakening requires that we meet each person fresh, as if for the first time, without the heavy baggage of previous assessments. This doesn't mean we forget everything or ignore patterns of behavior. It means we remain open to the possibility that this moment is new, that consciousness is always evolving, that transformation is always possible. When you approach someone without dragging along your accumulated judgments, you create space for a genuine encounter. You allow them to be who they are now, not who they were then. Living in the now means releasing the need to maintain your catalogue of other people's faults. It means letting go of the stories you've constructed about who they are and what they're capable of. It means meeting this moment with open eyes and an open heart, willing to be surprised, willing to be wrong about your previous conclusions, willing to see something you've never seen before. This is where freedom and judgment cannot coexist. Judgment keeps you locked in the past, endlessly reviewing and reinforcing old conclusions. Present moment awareness dissolves judgment naturally because you're too busy experiencing what is to worry about what was. When you're fully present, you discover that the person before you is as new as this breath, as fresh as this moment, as full of possibility as the unfolding now. The past loses its grip, judgment falls away, and you find yourself capable of relating to others with a clarity and compassion you never thought possible. My dear friends, we have journeyed together through one of the most transformative teachings ever given to humanity. We have explored how judgment imprisons us, how the Christ presence lives in all beings, how freedom comes through releasing our need to condemn, how separation is illusion, and how the present moment dissolves the chains of past assessments. But now you must ask yourself, what will you do with this understanding? Will. These words remain mere concepts, pleasant ideas to consider and then forget. Or will you allow them to penetrate your consciousness so deeply that they transform the way you see every person you encounter? The teaching is simple, but the practice requires vigilance. It requires awareness. It requires a willingness to catch yourself in the very moment judgment arises and choose differently. You will not become perfect at this overnight. You will stumble, you will judge, you will forget. But each time you remember, each time you choose to see the Christ instead of the error, each time you release condemnation and embrace recognition of divine presence, you take one more step into freedom. Remember this, the world does not need your judgment. It has plenty of that already. What the world desperately needs is your vision, your ability to see past appearances to reality, to recognize the divine spark even in the darkest places, to offer the gift of non-condemnation that creates space for transformation. When you stop judging others, you don't become passive or weak. You become powerful with the power of love. You become clear with the clarity of truth. You become free with the freedom that only comes from releasing the need to evaluate, condemn, and separate yourself from your fellow human beings. So I leave you with this: begin today. Begin now. Begin with the very next person you encounter. Look at them not with the eyes of judgment, but with the vision of Christ. See them not as their mistakes, but as their divine essence. Meet them not with your accumulated opinions, but with the freshness of present moment awareness. And as you do this, as you practice this daily, hourly, moment by moment, you will discover that you are not just changing how you see others. You are transforming your entire consciousness. You are awakening to who you truly are. You are living the teaching that Jesus gave us: judge not. This is your path. This is your calling. This is your freedom. Go now, in peace, and see with new eyes.